What I'm here to talk to you about is Mite Treatment. Is it important? I love bees as much as any 10 of you. I wouldn't be in the business that I'm in. 3,400 hives. I don't name them all, but I know every single one of them, and my hands touch every single hive. It's a family business. I started to tell you that in 1982 I got started in it, but now my whole family, my children all work with me. There's 7, and yes, even the 2 little ones are given jobs. So we really enjoy the bees. We want to take good care of them. I mentor a number of beekeepers, some of which are real obstinate when it comes to mite treatment, and even using smokers. They don't want to use smoke on their bees. And I always tell them this: it's not polite to open a hive without smoke. If you use the smoke properly and you get the bees away from the working area, you're not going to crush them. If you don't crush them, you won't get them angry. And it's just the polite thing to do. I had the good fortune for a good number of years to work with some Serbian beekeepers who came over and taught me how to raise queens in 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004. I mean, I had some good teachers, and they were very, very careful not to crush bees, to a fault. It took us so long to get through mating nucleuses because we had to make sure that all those bees were out of the way when we put those lids back on. But they really cared for their bees, and that is something that I want to try to get across to you. That mite treatments are for people who care for their bees. People who feel that mite treatments, I don't need to do it, my bees will be fine without it. You're not caring for your bees. You will lose the colony without a mite treatment. It may not happen this year, but it will happen. And the reason that it will happen is because all varroa mites eventually carry viruses. There's at least 7 that we know of. There's some viruses that we don't know about. There's one on the horizon that we're calling swarm flu virus. That's really what it's called. If you've had a lot of swarming, you might have that virus. It affects the bees in a way that makes them act very unnaturally. If you're getting a hive that wants to swarm at this time of the year, that's not natural. That's unnatural. And that's probably precipitated by either too high a mite load that they're aware of because they sense them under the cells, or just the virus that's present in the hive. We just theorize that's the case. You can't identify a virus until you find it. Then you have to associate what you think you found with the behavior you think you've identified. And it's very, very time consuming and difficult. But 7 have been identified. All of them are vectored by the varroa mite string wing virus. Have you ever heard of that one? If you notice bees in your bee yard crawling on the ground, maybe rolling over, look at them and look and see if their wings look deformed. Another name for it is deformed wing virus. Okay? When you see that, you are absolutely past the threshold, and you must treat, or you're going to lose the hive. That virus is closely associated with colony collapse disorder. They're 2 different things, but one brings on the other. Usually the deformed wing virus precipitates the collapse of the colony. Okay? Now, how many of you have already treated your colonies for mites? You're done with your mite treatment. Okay, that's good. You should be. I'm going to tell you, if you're taking notes, when you should treat and how you should treat. And what I'm saying, generally I always like to preface it by saying the advice that I give you comes from our experience with our bees in our operation. And we raise our own queens, so it's our own stock. But this advice will work no matter whose stock you're using, no matter where your location is. If you practice this, I can almost guarantee you will survive the winter. Bees always used to survive with very low loss levels prior to the mites. The only thing that's changed really are the mites. Yes, we have some insecticides we didn't have 25 years ago. Yes, there's a difference in the bee pasture. Those things will play a role in mortality, but the mites are the big one. Okay, this is what you need to do. Have your honey crop pulled off right after the basswood is done blooming. If you super your splits, or super your packages, or super your nucleuses, and take advantage of the black locust, which generally blooms around the 10th of June, it has been blooming a little bit earlier. But if you get your bees, your packages in late April, if you get your nukes in early May, by the time the black locust blooms, your single brood chamber, you can put an excluder on it, and you can put supers on it, and you can make honey. I have over 455-gallon drums of honey in our building this year. I don't know what our per hive average is, but it was huge. It was a bumper crop year. Having said that, 2 years ago was the worst crop I ever. It was a terrible year for us. It was cold and wet for all of you too. Okay, this was a great year. And yes, we run all of our colonies in single deeps. All right? Now, you're going to say, but Chris, we can't winter in that way. You're right, so just carry on with me here. All right? After you've supered for the black locust, super for the basswood, which blooms about the 4th of July. Okay? And it might come a little earlier, it might bloom a little bit later, depending where you are. But when the basswood in your area where your hives are done, and you need to know what a basswood tree is. If you don't, you need to go find out what it is. You need to look around and see where they are. When that's done blooming, you will have on your hive somewhere between 60 and 100 pounds of honey. You will. You take that honey and extract it, and at that point you give them their second brood chamber. Okay? And then that second brood chamber they can fill up on the sweet clover, whatever's left of alfalfa that might be in your area, and then you give them their mite treatment. Okay, so this mite treatment that I'm talking about comes sometime in August. That's going to be your first one. You're done making your honey crop. They've got their second brood chamber, so now you're already beginning to get those bees ready for winter. The third treatment, or the second treatment, should come sometime in September. And I am all in favor of a third treatment going into October. If you do that, your bees will be almost completely mite-free. They'll have all of the honey that they need in the super that they need it in, and a 2-brood chamber hive will winter just fine. We wintered quite a few winters before we stopped doing that. We take all of our bees to Florida and winter. Now we don't winter anything here. We used to. But with mites and not being able to put an eye on them and take care of them, we just thought that was kind of foolish. So we take everything down. But when we did, we wintered them all in 2. Okay? I run all my operation in a single lead. The only time we double them up is just to get duds taken care of. We stack them up on other hives. Now, our operation, even with the mite treatments, we'll see as much as a 25-30% loss every single year. And most of that is to queenlessness. It isn't to mites or a virus. It's to swarming hives that don't requeen properly. Running them in a single brood chamber with an excluder does lend itself to potential for swarms. Okay, so it does require you to be on top of your bees. But I'm just saying that if you practice that, you will make a honey crop, and you'll get it off, and you'll get an opportunity to treat your bees and give them that second brood chamber. But it will take some vigilant beekeeping. Okay? And you say, well, if you can't do it, what makes you think I can? Well, you have to remember, we don't get around to them as often as you have an opportunity to. We can get around to our bees about every 3 weeks, and that's if everything is running smoothly and we get around. If you have the opportunity to just put your eyes on your hive once a week, you don't have to get down in the brood nest. You just have to open the cover up and just see how they're doing and give them another super and close them up. I worked for another beekeeper for about 5 years while I was building my business. I was apprenticing with. The best thing you can do. If you don't have a mentor to work with, you need to get one. Now, as far as the mite treatments, I'm going to talk about a number of them. Okay? How many of you are familiar with HopGuard? Okay. HopGuard is a great product that Man Lake does sell. I think they're the only one. I don't think anybody else does. The thing about HopGuard, you have to put at least 2 of those strips in each brood chamber, and you have to treat twice. Okay? We used it a number of years ago and had a great mite drop. But we used it as the directions indicated, and we just used it the one time. And by the time we got to Florida and started going through the bees, man, our mite counts were back up in the teens. Right now, if you do a mite drop test where you have a sticky board underneath and you put the mite treatment on, or better, if you take a small jar with some alcohol in it and shake some bees into it, about 200 is plenty. Okay, and then shake it around and look for the mites to drop. You shouldn't get more than 6 mites. If you get more than 6 mites, you have a very high mite load in that 200 bees. And you should be getting 0, 1 or 2 at the most. Okay, well, with the hop guard, it knocked the mites down very well, but it didn't get the mites that were underneath the brood caps. Had we treated again in 2 weeks, the hop guard would have been very effective. And it's extremely safe to use. It is a good organic treatment to use. Okay. Another very good organic treatment to use are any of the organic acids. The formic acid, the oxalic acid. Thymol is not an acid, but the thymol treatment is a very good treatment. We do mix up our own thymol treatment, our own formic acid treatment, and we came up. I didn't come up with it, but we tweaked a oxalic acid treatment that's really good. But all of those treatments only control the mites. And we want something that will really hit them hard. The safest thing to really hit them hard is the Apivar strip. That's Amitraz. Amitraz has been being used by the bee industry since about the mid-80s. And it was first used by some gentlemen in South Georgia. And they were cattle farmers / beekeepers. They reckoned when they went into their shop and saw that this will kill mites. Well, we're going to try that. And they came up with a recipe that worked, and they still use it. You're bragging on your comb honey. I know some people in North Florida and South Georgia that make the prettiest comb honey you have ever seen, and that's all they do. And they're 4- and 5-generation beekeepers, and that's all they do is make comb honey, and it's gorgeous. And they have bees that are just boiling out of those hives, and all they've ever used to treat their bees is Amitraz.
Apivar is the brand.
Yeah, you cannot legally go and buy it and mix it yourself and apply it, and you don't need to. The Apivar strip, which is approved now, is extremely effective. And you put 2 of those in per brood chamber, and leave them in there for the prescribed amount of time, you will have a very good mite kill. All right? But I would like to see beekeepers using either the NOD product, which is also available through Dadant or through Van Lake, or the thymol or the formic acid. Those 2 other treatments as a organic aid in controlling the mite. How many of you have ever used the integrated pest management technique of putting a drone comb into your colony or a super frame in your brood chamber and letting them draw the drone brood on the bottom and then cutting it off at about 24 days?
Yeah, I used to do the big comb there, fill it full of honey.
They'll do that, and that's fine. I mean, that's fine, but during the brood season, especially in Florida when we're raising queens, we have to raise lots of drones. We raise millions of drones. We sell and raise about 10,000 queens, and we raise millions of drones to pollinate, or to mate with them, okay? Well, you can only imagine potentially how many mites we're raising at the same time. So during that time, the whole time, we're putting formic acid treatments on it. And we mix up the formic acid, we put it on a pad that's like a little butcher pad, like you get on the bottom of a pork chop. And we buffer that with Honeybee Healthy. And we put that on the colonies, and it works really, really well. And it keeps the mites down. It's not an end-all treatment, but it is certainly one of them. If you take the recommendation to pull your honey off early, and if you put on either a thymol treatment, an oxalic acid treatment, and there's an oxalic acid treatment now that was developed in South America using glycerin as a base and oxalic acid mixed with it, and then you soak like a cardboard coaster with it. I don't think commercially it's available yet. I don't think it is, but it will be. And that's an interesting treatment.
Is the oxalic acid in a crystal form or the
Yes,
liquid?
it's in a crystal form. It's wood bleach. It's relatively safe to handle, but you like anything that is a chemical, you want to be
The
careful.
glycerin is liquid
The
and the
glycerin
acid
is
is
a liquid.
crystals.
Correct.
So you mix those together and liquefy it?
You mix the glycerin to 150 degrees on the stove, and then you add the crystal to
Vaporizes
it.
the oxalic acid.
Well, it definitely, and then you pour that mixture over, in our case, the soft drink coasters. And when you handle those coasters, there's no feeling at all until it finds a cut. Then you feel, okay? You can test that coaster, you won't, but I do, it drives my kids crazy. A week, 10 days, 2 weeks later, the coaster is still damp because of the glycerin. Touch it to your tongue, it's like a 9-volt battery. So it's still effective, and it doesn't harm the bees. It's a very low-level miticide. The mites can't tolerate that. And what is the oxalic acid? It's the same acid that's in rhubarb, correct. So it's like giving your bees a rhubarb cookie, all right?
How about vaporizing? Anything with that?
I've not done the vaporizing,
Okay.
and certainly you can look on YouTube and you can observe what some people
We
are
have several
doing.
beekeepers that have made the tools and who are going towards it.
Yeah, I tend to stay away from it simply because you're vaporizing it, and I just don't want to put somebody in a position where they would be inhaling that or anything like that. When we handle the treatments that we make up, they're relatively safe to handle. I mean, these are my kids. They're going to have my grandkids. And I want them to all be attractive. Handling things that are going to harm them. Vaporizing, and especially the atomizing of oil in the hive, that's miserable for your bees. Really, when you think about it, don't do that. It's not polite to put all that oil in the hopes that it's going to make it slippery and the mites are going to fall off. It's horrible for the bees. So try to keep your treatments as low impact. And remember, there's one lady in that hive that is being subjected to every single treatment you put in there. She's near and dear to my heart because I read. That's the queen. And the queen breeders get the bad rep because your queen failed after you put about 16 gallons of toxins in your hive to kill the mites. You don't, I know you don't. But some guys do. And so you want to keep that in mind too, that whatever you put in that hive, she's subjected to. The worker bees, they're only in there for about 5 weeks from the time they hatch. But remember, they're in there for 3 weeks as an egg and larva. So they're subjected at that point. If the treatment is too harsh, that could be affecting their development. And then when they're running around in the hive, they're being exposed to something too. So I tend to say, get your bees into the winter as strong and healthy as you can. Perhaps another treatment in the springtime of the Apivar, one treatment, boom, so that you can get into the spring with relatively mite-free bees and make your honey crop without putting any stress on that queen at that time or on those worker bees. Make your honey crop. Listen, you folks are investing a ton of money in bees. I know because I charge $25 for a new. And I really don't like you to have to come back year after year because you lost them. I would like to see you make it through the winter. I'd like to mentor you on how to split that hive in the spring and invest in a queen, and now you've got 2 beautiful hives. By the way, if you do winter your hives, you must split them or they'll swarm. That's what bees do. If it gets through the winter and it's strong, you'll need to split that hive. Now, you may get fortunate and you may keep them at home and they may make you a great crop of honey, but more times than not, they're just going to take off and swarm right before the honey crop. Thank you very much. Because that's what bees like to do. Yes.
I have a friend who has people in continental Europe, and he says Europeans have banned the use of fungicides
Okay.
because bees lose their homing instincts because of fungicides.
I don't know about that, but I do know I've read some very reliable work that's been done on fungicides, and what it does do is it stops the fermentation process in the bee bread. One of the reasons we don't see bee bread being put away like we used to, and we don't see bees building on their fall stores in the early spring like we used to, is that it's no good. It doesn't store. If you take and can some tomatoes and the lid doesn't seal, what happens to those tomatoes that you put down? Yeah, it's pretty scary. Well, that's what happens to their food. And we've certainly seen it in Florida where it's literally bubbling out. It's fermenting, it's just bubbling out. Or they'll just pull it out, or they just don't make it. We have very smart bees. Our bees are very smart. And what they do is they just make just enough. And they don't make enough to make it through the whole winter. So when we get to Florida, we have to count on something coming in down there, or we have to give them a supplement patty. It's very effective, very expensive, to have to do that, but we have to do that in order to raise enough bees. And the reason is they're not storing that pollen away like they used to.
I had a question since you were naming off. August is a month for mite treatments. Here comes September. Here
And
comes
October.
October. Then let's throw something on for spring.
Right.
You mentioned Hopguard, Apivar, Thymol. Do you suggest beekeepers pick a treatment, stay with it? What
No.
about everyone I pick a different one? I'm putting
With
that out
a
as a
club like this, what would really be cool, and this could be done, is if you guys all pledge to one another, this is our calendar, this is the day we're treating, this is the rain day. If it rains, then this is the day. And you all did that. And I'm going to tell you why that would be so effective. If I didn't, if all of you did, but I didn't, and I've got, in Waukesha County alone, at least 900 hives, okay? So if I didn't, then I could be a repository for mites to reinfect all of you, okay? You all did, but I didn't. So it could happen, right. There always will be, but what would really be cool is if you guys could do that, and then you wouldn't have to necessarily be all using the same treatment, but if you were treating about the same time, it is possible to eliminate mites. Could it happen? No. But it's possible. And we could tell you how to do it, but would we all do it? No. So, but if there are ways we could do it, and the way to do it, that would be one of the first steps, is making sure everybody was on the same page. They tried to do that in Florida with the little psyllid that causes the greening, which is wiped out citrus in Florida. And they spray malathion, and they broadcast it over a very large area, county-wide areas. And they do that to try and just, get those psyllids. And it is quite effective, but in a period of time, they just come in and again from the outside. So, as beekeepers, we say, really? Do you really have to do that? Because in theory, it's a good idea, but it doesn't work because they can fly. They come in from somewhere else. Mites can't fly. The bees have to pick them up from other bees. That's why I say, if you could control your mites, and you weren't infecting one another, it would. Look, we got rid of American foulbrood, so it can be done, but it's not likely that it'll happen. So to answer your question, I do not believe in using only one treatment. I think you should switch it up. I think you should be familiar with all of them. The Apivar is by far the best. It's the Amatraz product. But the Hop Guard is right behind it, and if it's used properly, the others are all in the high 90% range. The formic acid pads that Nod puts out, the gelatin, yeah, that's you know that gelatin is some cool stuff. You guys want to know how to make it yourself? You won't, but I'll tell you how. Do you know what sodium polyacrylate is? Have you ever dealt with it? Ever handled it?
Probably not.
That's you ladies, eh? It's baby diaper absorption.
Oh, God.
It's the dust that's in there that absorbs all of the urine.
The gel part of the diaper?
You take, well, I've got a good recipe, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. But anyway, I got a really good recipe, it works really good, and that's how you mix up the oxalic acid with that stuff, okay? And that really, really works well. It's very, very effective, and it goes on the hive, and the hives really like it. Or excuse me, that's not how we do it. That's how we do it with the thymol. And that's what is in the thymol gel that you buy from Data. That's what makes the gel. I think they have some other proprietary things that they add to it. But for the longest time, we were trying to figure out, what is that? How do they make that? Because I used to make it with vegetable shrimp, and that was okay, but it wasn't as good as their stuff. But we finally found out what their stuff is. Yeah.
A quick question. How often do you treat with the Apivar in the fall? Is it August?
That's one time.
Just once?
Yeah,
Oh.
that's a one-time treatment is all that's really necessary. But you could follow it up with another. Okay? And again, there's no indication that Amatraz contaminates honey. These guys that I was telling you about earlier that make the comb honey, they use it, that's what, and they don't have contaminated honey, and it doesn't seem to affect their bees in a negative way. And so many beekeepers have used it. So, but it's still good to throw in those other, when I say organic, I'm not saying certified organic, I'm saying organic acid. It's an organic acid, it's not a man-made acid, you know. They're very effective, yeah.
So light resistance to Amatraz.
We haven't seen it. We've seen it with a number of the other chemicals that are out there. Fluvalinate, for example, the pyrethrins, they became resistant to that. But we haven't seen it with Amatraz. Now, there's been some anecdotal
Yeah, there has been.
comments, but my opinion, that's beekeepers that are mixing up their own stuff and they're not using it correctly. Or, and this does happen, the stuff right from the factory wasn't produced correctly. I think that the new Apivar strips and the company that's behind that is really doing a good job. I mean, everything that I've heard, I mean, I talked to a lot of very large operations, they're very satisfied with that product. The quality control is very good. But again, the thing is, I would rather see you apply one of those treatments and have the treatment fail than have you not treat and you will lose the bees. And it's an awful way for the colony to go. Bit up by mites, and then the viruses set in, and that will happen. And your colony will collapse. And most of colony collapse disorder, I believe, is associated with these viruses. The viruses have always been here. This is the interesting thing. They've always been here. The varroa mite came along and vectored them and just simply spread them into the bloodstream and into the colony just in a hyperbolic way. But they were always there. That's why you could look back and say, well, at different times in history, we've seen something similar happen long before the mites. Yeah, something else was spreading.
What species of mite?
The varroa destructor is the mite that spreads it. I don't believe the tracheomite spreads a lot of viruses. And I don't even think the tracheomite, you don't hear much about tracheomites anymore. But if you're using the thymol treatment or the formic acid treatment, that's very effective against tracheomites.
If you have them.
Yes.
Do you use any medications then also?
What's that?
Any medications then also? I mean, you the lights, and then they have all kinds of stuff.
No, we
No.
don't. You might have seen me do a little TV spot when they were doing that interview about the probiotics that's made. I don't use the probiotics, and I was very straightforward. I said, I can't do a commercial with that because I don't use this stuff. And I don't not believe in it. In other words, I'm not like, I don't believe that works.
Right.
But I have no reason to believe that it's beneficial, and it's expensive, okay? So if you keep your bees healthy otherwise, I can tell you that both Dadan and Mann Lake have put a ton of research into their bee foods. The AP1, what is it now? AP23, I think the Dadan's up to, and then Mega Bee with Mann Lake. Those are good products. You don't need to feed it all the time, but in the spring of the year, give to them. And there's nothing wrong with giving them a treatment, or not a treatment, but a helping along, a feeding of that in the autumn to fatten the bees up, especially if they don't have an opportunity to get out and get a lot of pollen. They have been recently. Today we were in about 6 different bee yards. Beautiful honeycomb, beautiful. I didn't have to feed a lot of the hives I looked at today. They were getting heavy, they're bringing in a lot of pollen, really nice. And that will continue until we get a frost.
What if you had 1,000 customers standing in line and they said, we want 100% organic honey with no chemicals?
I would just try to educate them. You have to be polite. Now, when I speak to big groups and I talk about queen rearing, one of my points is the customer is not always right. Okay, but you have to be very tactful. Okay, and you can't be Donald Trump. You can, but you're going to lose a lot of customers. Right? So you very patiently have to explain to people that we just don't live in a world where that's possible. So you want to educate them in the fact that you've got your bees. I don't know where you had yours, but let's just say that you've got them in the kettle marine, southern and northern unit. You've got them out someplace where they're working flowers that you planted perhaps on some property, or maybe they're on the property that you've got your bees on. Somebody talked about the botanical center. Can't get a whole lot more organic than a place like that. I mean, they're not using a whole lot of chemicals. If you're in the kettle marine and they're making honey on basswood trees and black locust.
You haven't mentioned about temperatures, and I was reading that, like, I'm trying to figure out what I would buy. A lot of them were temperature dependent.
They're really not. You don't have the temperature spikes. If you lived in the Sonoran Desert, you would want to stay away from formic acid. But around here, you don't really have to worry. And one of the ways we found that was the best way to apply formic acid was over a super, one super. And that way you never had to worry about damaging the brood. The thing about formic acid, oxalic acid, and thymol, if your bees are bit up really bad, they are going to depopulate your hive in a hurry. You'll know you've got a mite problem because they'll all be outside the next day, because that stuff burns so bad in those little bites. Then you have to take it off. You have to take that treatment off and reduce it quite a bit until they're willing to go back in. But if it drives your bees out, unless you might have put too much on, but if you put the recommended dosage on, if you buy the package and you open and put it on, it should not drive them out. If it does, your bees have lots of bites on them. And those are open wounds and they hurt. Okay? That's the acid effect. Now, it's also killing the mites, but it's very harsh on them. And don't fool yourself. Queens can be bit by mites. We've seen them on young queens that we're caging. Queens that we're raising, we go, oh my God, there's a mite there. Get her off. We'll put her in a cage, but so they can get on queens and they can bite queens. So, and if a queen is bit a number of times, even if she's not infected with a virus, but she may be, the virus could cause issues, but even if she's not, just the subjection to the treatments with those open wounds, and I don't know that the cuticle heals. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if the bee heals. I don't know. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know. Yes?
So I just bought some Mite Away Quick Strips, which is a formic acid
Yes.
pad. I haven't used them yet. It's my
Right.
first year with bees. What I read is to put them in between the two brood chambers, but you're saying that sometimes you put them on top of a super.
I haven't used the Mite Quick. I would do whatever their direction is, whatever their directions are, follow their directions. So I haven't used that product. Ours, when we mix it up, we put it on top. And we will put it, if it's a double brood chamber, sometimes we do put it in between. But we have found that, you know, sometimes they'll say with those to put a rim in there for air. We find that if you don't want that extra piece of equipment, just a honey super. It can be just an empty honey super, just dry comb, just set it in there, put your treatment on top, and that gives enough air. It's still going to do the job, but it's going to be away from the brood just a little bit.
I mean, just like everything else, you get 12 different answers if you ask 10 different people.
Right.
Some people
Especially
say,
in bee clubs.
well, that's what I'm saying. Some people are saying to leave the screens open on the bottom, some are saying to close them. But then you've seen
All of
about
our-
people that are killing their bees with it, and other people aren't having any problems, and I suppose that depends on the mite load.
It depends on the mite load, depends on how much you're putting on. And again, you know, use some common sense when you're putting on these mite treatments. Put it on and go back and look at it in a few hours. Look at it first thing the next morning. Look at it the next afternoon. You know, look at the hive. Make
And
sure
you're
they're
saying
not
if
coming
they're all
out.
flying out,
If they're coming out or if they're roaring, if you put the treatment on and you can hear those bees are roaring, that's a problem. Okay? And again, the commercially produced stuff should be the same. Every package should be the same, but they're not. Okay? So sometimes you'll get a package and it'll want to be a little harsher than the other, sometimes there's no effect at all. So that happens.
I know some people are, like look at YouTube, you know how that is, using a lot of essential oils.
Yeah.
Palmer, I think, was talking about it, Mike Palmer, or Bush. So a lot of people are using essential oils instead of these treatments.
Right.
Have you ever heard much luck on
We
that?
tried that, we did that. And we used camphor oil, and I have to think about it, think what I bought all my stuff from Liebermuth. I still get all my thymol from Liebermuth in Indiana, very reasonably priced. Good company to deal with. I used camphor. I can't remember all it was. It was beautiful smelling stuff. Man, it smelled good. I stopped because I was really messing the hive up. You put all these smells in a beehive. Guess what they don't smell anymore? Queen. Guess what happens when they don't smell the queen? They raise a new one. Okay? So it smelled wonderful, and every indication was, I don't know if it was killing the mice, but it smelled good and I felt good. Okay? This is wax. It's being brought into day dance. That was supposed to be used for your foundation. It can't be, because you can smell the insecticide in it, or you can smell the essential oils. Or so much waxes the kidneys or liver of the colony. It will absorb that. So that's one reason why we got away from that. Now these acids that I'm talking about do not end up, as far as we can tell, in the wax, because the acid doesn't attach to the fat, whereas the oils do. Oil will. Thymol is an oil.
The camphor oil, you're talking about
The essential
the
oils.
foggers.
The foggers are, like I said, a very, in my opinion, a bad idea.
So-
Just imagine, well, who likes to run around with all that sunscreen oil on you? Or with all the DEET on you for mosquitoes? You feel oily and greasy when you wash it off. Well, every time you put that in your beehive, you're doing that to your beehive. And to all the cells, and to the larva, the wood, everything. You're coating everything. Okay? And you said something about screen bottoms. All of our bottoms are screen bottoms. All of our pallets are screen, all of the time. So, when I'm treating, I can throw something on my hive that may not affect my hive like it would affect yours. If you're treating, you're treating in August, your hive's wide open. Treating in September, it's probably still open. But if that last treatment in late September or early October, if it's a nice October and you're all late, so you're all looking at October treatments, you know, you're going to be conscious of that reducer. You need to be putting it in so that there aren't hornets and other bees robbing, but at the same time, now they're going to have a little bit harder time ventilating. So that'd be another reason to think about the Apivar. this fall, especially if you're late, go to the Apivar.
That's one of the few treatments that's not temperature sensitive.
Not at all, not at all. I mean, the formic acid can be harsh in hot temperatures, and some of them are of no effect at all if it's too cold.
They
Because
say
if it's
between
too
50
chilly.
and 90 degrees.
Yeah,
is
if it's too
ideal.
chilly and they cluster and they can't break cluster, well, then they're not gonna be.
Hot guard is a temperature sensitive one.
Yep, that's one they like to see used during the summer, and again, I like that one in the spring. That's a wonderful spring treatment, and it's good first one in the fall, yep. Hop Guard's good stuff. It's made from hops, the same stuff that's in beer, but no, guys, you can't pour beer on it. Not even something super, super hoppy. You've got to use the Hop Guard, okay? But it works. It's really effective. We switched everything over to a screen bottom. Any treatment we do use that knocks them down, they fall all the way down. And down underneath
And they
those
can't
pallets,
get
there's
back up.
usually a lot of ants and things like that. Because if they are just anesthetized, they'll crawl back up again.
Chris, how big is the holes in the screens of your screen bottom?
In the screens that I use is 6 mesh. It's a little bit more expensive than the 8 mesh, but unless you buy your 8 mesh hardware cloth from a place like McNichols, it's going to be made in China, and it's very, very thin, and it tears easily. But the 6 mesh is made of the same gauge wire that quarter mesh is made from.
Okay,
So it's hard.
What's the distance between the squares?
Well, there's 6 squares per inch, so I don't know what that is. But there's
Well,
6
yeah,
little
per-
openings
so it'd be
per
about
inch.
3.333.
8 mesh is 8, and quarter mesh
Yeah.
is 4 per inch.
Yeah.
And the queens and the bees can't fit through it, which is nice, but any debris can fall through it, and it's fairly strong fiber. You know,
But the point I want to make is that if you don't put a mesh on that's big enough, they'll just go down and land on the mesh and fall right back up.
Yeah,
You want it to go down and right through it.
And you don't, if you build your own, don't use window screen.
Too small.
Don't, window screen is much too small. You use hardware cloth, like quarter mesh, would be fine for you guys.
Okay, any further questions for Chris?